Welcome, fellow explorers of Middle-earth. Today, we're diving into one of the most brutal and strategic chapters in the history of Tolkien's world. The war waged by the Witch-king of Angmar in the frozen lands of the north. This isn't just about battles. It's a story of survival, betrayal, and relentless darkness, where every move shaped the fate of Middle-earth as we know it. Before the War of the Ring ever threatened Gondor in the south, the Northern Kingdom of Arnor faced its own deadly foe, the Witch-king of Angmar. Sauron's most ruthless lieutenant set his sights on Arnor with one goal: total destruction. From his stronghold of Cardolan, a fortress steeped in black sorcery, the Witch-king orchestrated his campaign. His forces weren't just soldiers. They were an army of orcs, evil men, and creatures of the shadow united under his command. At first it seemed like Arnor might hold its ground. The Dúnedain, descendants of Númenor, were proud and resilient. Their king, Argaleb, fought valiantly to defend their lands, even fortifying key positions like the Weather Hills. But Angmar's power wasn't only in numbers. It thrived on division. Arnor had already splintered into three smaller kingdoms: Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur, after the death of King Erendur. That fracture made them vulnerable, and the Witch-king knew it. Rhudaur fell quickly under Angmar's influence, its throne seized by a lord loyal to the Witch-king. Arthedain, the last true bastion of resistance, bore the brunt of the attack. Even as Argaleb led his people with courage, the shadow of Angmar grew darker, pressing the Dúnedain to the brink of despair. What followed was a relentless siege of their fortifications, a series of devastating losses, and a battle for survival that echoed through the annals of Middle-earth's history. This war was not just about lands or power. It was a test of endurance. It was about holding on to hope in the face of a shadow that seemed unstoppable. But as we'll see, even in the darkest moments, alliances were forged, sacrifices were made, and the spirit of the free peoples refused to be extinguished. Let's step back in time to the Second Age, to the moment when the faithful of Númenor, led by Elendil, first arrived in Middle-earth. This wasn't just a migration. It was a rebirth of hope for men after the downfall of Númenor, when their homeland was swallowed by the sea. These exiles carried with them their unbroken will and the wisdom of ages past. Elendil, tall and noble, landed in the northern reaches, planting his banner on the shores of Middle-earth. There he founded the Kingdom of Arnor, the realm of the faithful. Meanwhile, his sons, Isildur and Anarion, landed in the south, establishing Gondor along the great river Anduin. Together, these two realms stood as twin beacons of Númenorian resilience, separated by vast lands but united in purpose. Arnor was a land of grandeur. Its capital, Anúminas, shone like a jewel on the shores of Lake Nanual. With its gleaming towers and thriving culture, the cities of Arnor reflected the craftsmanship and spirit of Númenor, echoing the lost splendor of their drowned homeland. Gondor, on the other hand, rose as a military power with fortresses like Minas Ithil and Minas Anor guarding the south. These two realms were siblings, different in strength and focus, but born of the same legacy. However, these kingdoms weren't content to simply survive. They immediately prepared for the greater battles to come. Elendil and his sons recognized that Sauron, the shadow that had brought Númenor to its knees, would rise again. They forged alliances with the elves, particularly with Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor. Together, they prepared for what would be one of the greatest conflicts in Middle-earth's history, the War of the Last Alliance. This era wasn't just about the founding of kingdoms. It was about setting the stage for the future of Middle-earth. The strength and wisdom of Elendil's line became the backbone of the Free People's resistance. Even after the kingdoms faced division and decline, their legacy would endure, lighting the way for future generations. The splendor of Arnor couldn't shield it from the divisions within. By the Third Age, the strength of the Dúnedain had waned, and the unity forged by Elendil began to crumble. When King Erendur, the last ruler of a united Arnor, passed away in 861 of the Third Age, his sons quarreled over their inheritance. This discord split the once great kingdom into three smaller realms: Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. Arthedain, the northernmost of these realms, was ruled by Amleth, the eldest and rightful heir to Erendur's throne. It claimed legitimacy as the continuation of the original Arnor. To the south, Cardolan established itself as an independent kingdom, wary of its northern cousin. And in the east, nestled between the Weather Hills and the Bruinen, Rhudaur became a restless and dangerous land, its rulers driven more by ambition than loyalty to their heritage. The division was more than political. It was catastrophic. The fracturing of Arnor weakened the Dúnedain, leaving them vulnerable to external threats. The kingdoms squabbled over key territories, particularly the Weather Hills and Amon Sûl, Weathertop, which housed one of the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones of Númenor. Whoever controlled Amon Sûl held a strategic advantage, for the Palantir provided insight into distant lands, a treasure beyond measure in an age of growing darkness. This fragile balance of power didn't last. Rhudaur, plagued by internal strife and a dwindling population of Dúnedain, fell under the influence of Angmar. Its throne was seized by a lord loyal to the Witch-king, turning the once proud realm into a puppet state of evil. Cardolan, while more stable, struggled to fend off incursions from Angmar and Rhudaur, and its strength began to falter. Arthedain stood alone as the last bastion of resistance in the north. Its kings, direct descendants of Isildur, fought valiantly to maintain their claim over all Arnor. But as Angmar's shadow grew, the divided kingdoms of the Dúnedain faced their greatest test, a test they were no longer united enough to withstand. In the heart of the Weather Hills stood Amon Sûl, known to many as Weathertop. This great watchtower, built in the days of Elendil, was more than just a stronghold. It was a symbol of the unity and strength of the Dúnedain. Within its high walls lay one of the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones, a relic of Númenor that allowed its wielder to glimpse distant lands and events. This made Amon Sûl a strategic and coveted site, both for its vantage point and the knowledge it held. After Arnor's division, Amon Sûl became the subject of fierce rivalry between the three successor kingdoms. Arthedain claimed rightful ownership, citing its king's direct lineage from Elendil. Cardolan and Rhudaur, however, contested this, viewing the tower's control as essential to their survival and influence. The tension over Amon Sûl mirrored the fractured state of Arnor itself, divided, contentious, and vulnerable. For a time, Arthedain managed to hold the tower, using its strategic location to monitor the growing threat from Angmar. But the Witch-king wasn't blind to its significance. As his power in the north expanded, he set his sights on Amon Sûl, knowing that taking the tower and the Palantir within would cripple Arthedain's ability to counter his movements. The assault on Amon Sûl came in 1409 of the Third Age, during one of Angmar's most devastating campaigns. The defenders, led by Argaleb, son of King Malvagil, fought valiantly atop the wind-swept hill. Yet they were vastly outnumbered. The army of Angmar and their allies from Rhudaur overran the tower, breaking its defenses and slaying Argaleb in the process. It was a crushing blow to Arthedain and a somber turning point in the war. But even in defeat, the Dúnedain managed a small victory. As the tower burned, shrouded in smoke and ash, the Palantir was carried away by loyal hands. It was taken to Fornost, the last stronghold of Arthedain, ensuring that the Witch-king would not wield its power. Amon Sûl, however, was left in ruins, a crown of broken stone atop the hill that once symbolized the strength of the north. Around the year 1300 of the Third Age, whispers began to spread through the northern lands of Middle-earth. A new power was stirring in the cold, desolate reaches beyond the Etten Moors. What seemed like a distant threat at first quickly grew into a shadow that consumed the hearts and lands of men. This was Angmar, a realm forged in malice with the Witch-king at its helm. From his fortress of Cardolan, nestled in the frozen mountains, the Witch-king orchestrated his campaign with cold precision. Angmar was no ordinary kingdom. It wasn't built for glory or prosperity, but for ruin and despair. Its armies were composed of orcs, trolls, and evil men who flocked to the Witch-king's banner. These forces, united by fear and cruelty, fed off the division and weakness of the fractured realms of Arnor. The Witch-king's strength lay not just in his armies, but in his strategy. He understood that Arnor's division into Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur had left it vulnerable. Rhudaur, already weakened by internal strife, was the first to fall under his control. A lord loyal to Angmar seized its throne, turning the kingdom into a vassal state. This move allowed the Witch-king to tighten his grip on the region and focus his efforts on dismantling the remaining resistance. But Angmar's rise wasn't marked by grand battles or declarations of conquest. It was a creeping shadow. The land itself seemed to change under its influence. The air grew heavier, the skies darker, and the people of the north lived in constant fear. Angmar thrived on discord, feeding off the infighting and mistrust among the Dúnedain. By the time its full strength was revealed, it was too late for many. Despite the darkness, resistance remained. Arthedain and Cardolan stood firm, their kings rallying their people against the growing threat. The elves of Lindon, led by Cardolan the shipwright, watched closely, knowing that Angmar posed a threat not only to men, but to all of Middle-earth. Still, the shadow of Angmar loomed large, and the Witch-king's ultimate goal, the complete destruction of Arnor, seemed within his grasp. As Angmar's shadows stretched further across the north, even the sanctuaries of the elves were not spared from its malice. In the year 1409 of the Third Age, the Witch-king turned his gaze toward Rivendell, the hidden refuge of Elrond. Though protected by enchantments and nestled deep within the misty mountains, Rivendell was not invulnerable. Its fall would have been a devastating blow to the free peoples, as it served as a center of wisdom, counsel, and strength. The siege of Rivendell began with calculated precision. The Witch-king, now controlling Rhudaur, used its proximity to launch an assault on the valley. Orcs, trolls, and evil men swarmed the region, burning the forests and pressing hard against Rivendell's defenses. Elrond, wise and resolute, knew that his forces alone could not withstand the prolonged attack. In Rivendell's darkest hour, Elrond sent urgent messages across the mountains to the Galadhrim of Lothlorien, seeking aid from the elves of the Golden Wood. The response was swift and decisive. A host of elves, led by their captains, marched over the high passes, braving the treacherous journey to reinforce Rivendell. Their arrival turned the tide, breaking the siege and scattering the Witch-king's forces. Though the victory saved Rivendell, the cost of the conflict was great. The surrounding lands bore the scars of war, and the once hidden valley now stood exposed to Angmar's gaze. Yet the resilience of Rivendell and the unity of the elves sent a clear message. Even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the free peoples would not surrender their havens. This siege was more than just a battle. It was a reminder of Rivendell's importance in the struggle against evil. Under Elrond's stewardship, Rivendell continued to stand as a beacon of hope. But the war was far from over. The Witch-king, though repelled, would not be deterred, and the battle for the north would escalate further. Amon Sûl, or Weathertop, was not just a hill crowned by ancient ruins. It was a symbol of Arnor's legacy. This watchtower, built during Elendil's reign, housed one of the Palantiri, a seeing stone capable of revealing far-off lands and events. But as Angmar's war against the north intensified, the tower became a prime target for the Witch-king's forces. In 1409 of the Third Age, Angmar launched a devastating campaign against Arthedain, aiming to crush its defenses and seize Amon Sûl. King Argaleb, son of Malvegil, rallied the Dúnedain to defend the tower. The wind-swept summit became a battlefield, with the defenders standing against an overwhelming tide of orcs and hillmen loyal to the Witch-king. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. Argaleb fought alongside his men, his sword flashing like a beacon of hope amid the chaos. But their courage could not match the sheer numbers and dark sorcery wielded by their enemies. The forces of Angmar stormed the hill, breaching its defenses and slaying Argaleb. It was a grievous loss for Arthedain, both in spirit and strategy. Despite the defeat, a small act of defiance preserved a fragment of hope. As the tower fell, the Palantir was secretly smuggled out, carried north to Fornost by loyal hands. Though Amon Sûl was lost, its most valuable treasure remained beyond the Witch-king's reach. The tower itself was left in ruins, its once proud walls reduced to a crown of shattered stone. The fall of Amon Sûl marked a turning point in the war. It underscored Angmar's growing dominance and Arthedain's vulnerability. Yet, even as the Dúnedain mourned their losses, they held on to the belief that their fight was not yet over. The memory of Amon Sûl's fall became a rallying cry, a reminder of what they were striving to protect. The Barrow-downs, or Tir and Gorthad, were ancient burial grounds revered by the Dúnedain and their ancestors. These grassy mounds stretched across the lands of Cardolan, their origins dating back to the First Age, when the forefathers of men laid their honored dead to rest. For centuries, these hills were places of memory and respect. But with the coming of the Witch-king, the Barrow-downs became something far darker. After the Great Plague devastated Cardolan in 1636 of the Third Age, the Witch-king saw an opportunity to ensure the kingdom could never rise again. Using his dark sorcery, he cursed the Barrow-downs, calling forth shadowy spirits from the void between life and death. These malevolent beings, later known as the Barrow-wights, turned the sacred resting places into haunted grounds. The Barrow-wights were a terrifying presence. Pale lights flickered in their hollow eyes, and their spectral forms moved silently among the mounds. Their touch was like ice creeping into the flesh, a chill that drained the life from any who dared enter their domain. They animated the bones of the dead, turning once restful remains into grotesque guardians of the Witch-king's curse. This act of desecration transformed the Barrow-downs into a place of dread. The once honored tombs became traps for the living, where travelers who strayed too far into the mists never returned. The Dúnedain, deeply tied to the ancient traditions of their people, recoiled from the Barrow-downs, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they could do nothing to cleanse the land. The Witch-king's curse on the Barrow-downs was not just an act of cruelty. It was a calculated move to sever the connection between the Dúnedain and their past. By corrupting the burial mounds, he struck at their heritage, ensuring that the memory of Cardolan would be one of fear and loss. The Barrow-downs stood as a grim reminder of Angmar's power and the cost of its malice. Amidst the grand tales of kings, battles, and ancient evils, it's easy to forget the humble beginnings of the hobbits. Their story during the chaos of the Third Age is one of quiet resilience and remarkable determination. As the shadow of Angmar stretched across the north, even the peaceful lives of the hobbits were disrupted. The hobbits of this era, particularly the Stoors, lived in the angle between the rivers Horwell and Loudwater. They were a simple folk, known for their love of peace and their skill in farming and fishing. But as the lands grew tainted by war and the threat of Angmar loomed closer, many Stoors realized they could no longer remain. War was a merciless visitor, and the hobbits were unprepared for its arrival. Some of these hobbits sought refuge across the misty mountains, settling along the banks of the Gladden River. There they adapted to a new way of life as fisher folk, living quietly on the edges of Middle-earth's wildlands. From this group, a dark tale would later emerge, the story of Smeagol, who would come to be known as Gollum. His tragic fate, bound to the One Ring, began in these unassuming waters. Other hobbits chose a different path, looking westward. These wanderers undertook a long and dangerous journey across the plains and valleys of Arnor. It was during this time that King Argaleb II of Arthedain took notice of these small, determined travelers. The sight of the hobbits moving through the war-torn lands stirred something within him, and he granted them permission to settle in the fertile region beyond the Barrow-downs River. Thus, in 1601 of the Third Age, the hobbits established the Shire. Led by the Falahide brothers, Marcho and Blanco, they crossed the Bridge of Stonebows and claimed the land between the river and the far downs. The hobbits fell in love with this green and gentle land, building their homes and cultivating a society that would later become a bastion of peace in an age of turmoil. The story of the hobbits during this time may not seem as grand as the battles of kings, but it is no less significant. Their resilience, courage, and love for simple joys would echo across the ages, culminating in their pivotal role in the War of the Ring. The Shire was born out of hardship, and it would one day give rise to some of the greatest heroes Middle-earth had ever seen. As if the wars and shadows of Angmar weren't enough to test the resilience of the North, a new and insidious threat arose during the Third Age, a creeping pestilence known as the Great Plague. Originating from the distant lands of Rhudaur in 1636 of the Third Age, this deadly illness swept through Middle-earth, leaving devastation in its wake. Unlike war, the plague came silently, without warning, and spared no one in its path. Cardolan, already weakened by years of conflict with Angmar, bore the brunt of the plague in the north. The Dúnedain of Cardolan, who had stubbornly held out in the Barrow-downs, were struck down in great numbers. Entire settlements were wiped out, and the once proud kingdom became a ghost of its former self. The survivors, too few to reclaim their lands, abandoned the region, leaving it desolate and vulnerable. The Witch-king of Angmar, ever the opportunist, seized upon this moment of weakness. With dark sorcery, he cursed the Barrow-downs, ensuring that no one would dare resettle the land. The spirits he summoned, the Barrow-wights, haunted the ancient mounds, turning them into places of dread. Thus the plague not only decimated Cardolan's population, but also allowed Angmar to tighten its grip on the north. Even Arthedain, the last bastion of Arnor, wasn't immune to the effects of the plague. Though its people suffered less severely, the kingdom found itself increasingly isolated, unable to aid its neighbors or mount any significant counterattacks against Angmar. The Great Plague, in its quiet cruelty, achieved what armies could not. It fragmented and demoralized the Dúnedain further. The Great Plague left a lasting scar on Middle-earth. Its effect rippled far beyond the lands of the north, even reaching Gondor in the south, where it claimed the lives of many, including the king. This event underscored the fragility of life in Middle-earth and the relentless challenges faced by its free peoples, not just from swords and sorcery, but from nature's indiscriminate wrath. In the aftermath of the Great Plague and the continued assaults from Angmar, Arthedain stood as the last true bastion of the Dúnedain in the north. Isolated and battered, the kingdom found itself alone in its fight against the Witch-king's relentless forces. Despite these challenges, the kings of Arthedain refused to yield, their resilience becoming a beacon of hope for the scattered remnants of Arnor. King Argaleb's son, Arveleg, rose to the throne at a young age after his father's fall during the defense of Amon Sûl. Though inexperienced, Arveleg quickly proved himself a capable leader. With the fires of vengeance burning in his heart, he rallied his people and prepared to defend Arthedain from Angmar's encroaching shadow. His efforts were bolstered by an unexpected ally, the elves. Círdan, the shipwright of Lindon, ever watchful of the Witch-king's movements, sent a host of elves to aid Arthedain in its darkest hour. Together, the Dúnedain and the elves mounted a desperate defense, reclaiming key territories such as the Weather Hills and driving back Angmar's forces. For a time, the borders of Arthedain were secured, allowing the kingdom to catch its breath. The alliance with the elves was more than a military necessity. It was a reminder that the free peoples could still stand united against the forces of darkness. This collaboration not only strengthened Arthedain's defenses, but also rekindled hope among its people. The combined strength of men and elves proved to be too much for Angmar's forces, forcing the Witch-king to regroup and reassess his strategies. Yet, even with these victories, Arthedain's position remained precarious. Its population was dwindling, and the kingdom's resources were stretched thin. Every battle won came at a cost, and the specter of Angmar loomed ever larger on the horizon. Arthedain's survival depended on its ability to endure, to adapt, and to draw strength from its allies. But the Witch-king's plans were far from over, and the war in the north was far from finished. Throughout the Third Age, the elves of Middle-earth played a crucial role in the resistance against the Witch-king of Angmar. Their involvement in the wars of the north wasn't just about military strength. It was about preserving hope, unity, and the ancient alliances that had bound the free peoples together since the days of the last alliance. Cardolan the shipwright, lord of the Grey Havens in Lindon, was among the most steadfast allies of the Dúnedain. As the Witch-king's forces advanced, Cardolan sent warriors from Lindon to support Arthedain. These elves, skilled in archery and swordsmanship, became the backbone of Arthedain's defense, helping to reclaim critical areas like the Weather Hills and holding the line against Angmar's incursions. The elves of Rivendell, led by Elrond, also played a significant part. Rivendell was more than a sanctuary. It was a strategic stronghold. Elrond's wisdom and foresight guided the northern resistance, and his warriors often joined the Dúnedain in battle. Rivendell's location, shielded by the Misty Mountains and protected by enchantments, made it a crucial point of refuge and coordination throughout the war. Further east, the Galadrim of Lothlorien lent their strength during pivotal moments, including the siege of Rivendell. These elves, led by their captains and with the blessings of Galadriel and Celeborn, crossed treacherous terrain to provide aid when it was needed most. Their presence often turned the tide of battles, showing that even in a time of decline, the elves remained a force to be reckoned with. Despite their dwindling numbers and the fading of their influence in Middle-earth, the elves demonstrated an unyielding commitment to the fight against Angmar. They understood that the fall of the North would not only spell doom for men, but also weaken the broader resistance against Sauron. Their efforts ensured that the Dúnedain could continue their struggle, and their actions left an indelible mark on the history of the North. The final days of Arthedain were marked by desperation and bravery. By the late Third Age, the Witch-king of Angmar had marshaled his forces for one last crushing assault on the north. Arthedain, the last remnant of Arnor, was outnumbered and isolated. Its king, Arvedui, understood the gravity of the situation. Without aid, his kingdom faced certain destruction. The assault came during a bitter winter, the harsh winds and snows amplifying the terror of Angmar's advance. The Witch-king's army descended upon Fornost, the capital of Arthedain, with overwhelming strength. Orcs, trolls, and evil men stormed the city walls, their war cries piercing the cold air. Despite their grim situation, the defenders of Fornost fought valiantly. Among them were a small band of hobbit archers, proving their courage and loyalty to the Dúnedain. The battle for Fornost was fierce, but the defenders were overwhelmed. The city fell, its streets running with blood, and its people scattered. King Arvedui, seeing no hope of reclaiming the city, fled north with a handful of loyal followers. They sought refuge in the frozen lands of Forichel, hoping to regroup and find aid. But the icy wilderness offered little solace, and the king's journey would soon end in tragedy. As Fornost lay in ruin, the Witch-king claimed a chilling victory. His forces ravaged the surrounding lands, destroying what remained of Arthedain's settlements, and leaving its people scattered. The once proud kingdom, a beacon of Númenórean heritage, was no more. The fall of Arthedain marked the culmination of the Witch-king's campaign in the north, a devastating blow to the Dúnedain. Yet, even in defeat, there was a glimmer of hope. The line of kings did not perish with Arvedui. His son, Aranarth, survived, and became the first chieftain of the Dúnedain, preserving their heritage in secrecy. The flame of Arnor flickered, but did not go out entirely, waiting for the day it could burn brightly once again. After the fall of Fornost, King Arvedui and a few loyal followers fled northward into the frozen wilderness of Forachel. This icy, desolate region was home to the Lossoth, the snowmen of Forachel, a hardy and secretive people descended from the Forodwaith. They lived on the edge of survival, shaped by the harsh environment of the far north, where the cold was a living force, relentless and unforgiving. Arvedui and his companions were in dire straits. They sought refuge in the barren tundra, where food and shelter were scarce. The Lossoth, though wary of strangers, eventually took pity on the exiled king and his men. They offered them small amounts of food and helped them construct snow huts for shelter against the relentless cold. However, the Lossoth feared the Witch-king and were hesitant to involve themselves too deeply in the plight of the Dúnedain. Cardolan the shipwright, upon learning of Arvedui's desperate flight, sent a ship north to rescue the king. But the icy winds and treacherous seas delayed its arrival. When the ship finally reached the Bay of Forachel, the Lossoth warned Arvedui not to board it, sensing a storm brewing on the horizon. The Lossoth chief's advice was ignored, though, as Arvedui believed this was his only chance to escape. As the ship set sail, the Lossoth's fears came true. A fierce storm arose, unleashing freezing winds and crushing waves. Ice floes closed in on the ship, splintering its hull. Arvedui, the last king of Arthedain, perished beneath the icy waters of Forachel, along with the crew of the rescue ship. His death marked the end of the kingdom of Arthedain and the extinguishing of the last flame of Arnor's monarchy. Before leaving, Arvedui gifted the Lossoth chief the ring of Barrow-downs, an ancient Númenórean artifact of immense value. This heirloom would later be recovered by the Dúnedain, ensuring that the legacy of their line endured. Despite the tragedy, the story of Arvedui and the Lossoth remains a testament to resilience and the harsh realities faced by the Free Peoples during the Age of Angmar. The Witch-king's conquest of the north may have seemed complete with the fall of Arthedain, but Gondor, bound by ancient ties to Arnor, had not forgotten its northern kin. King Eärnil of Gondor, moved by Arvedui's final plea for aid, mustered a vast host to bring retribution upon Angmar and reclaim what had been lost. The command of this formidable force was entrusted to his son, Prince Eärnur, a captain of great renown. Eärnur's fleet, black sails filling the horizon, sailed swiftly to the Grey Havens, where the elves of Lindon welcomed the southern army with awe. The sheer size of Gondor's host was a testament to their commitment, with riders from Rhovanion and soldiers equipped for a prolonged campaign. Joining this army were the surviving Dúnedain, bolstered by the hope that Gondor's arrival brought. The alliance of Gondor and Lindon marched inland, drawing the Witch-king's forces into battle near the hills of Evendim. The Witch-king, confident in his prior victories, met them on the field, expecting yet another triumph. But this time, the Free Peoples were united. their strength and strategy overwhelming Angmar's forces. Eärnor's cavalry, bold and swift, struck from the rear, turning the Witch-king's retreat into a rout. The battle reached its climax when Eärnor confronted the Witch-king himself. Mounted on his dark steed, the Witch-king exuded an aura of dread that even Eärnor, for all his valor, could not withstand. His steed, overcome with terror, fled, leaving Eärnor shaken and the Witch-king emboldened. But as the shadow deepened, a new light entered the fray. Glorfindel, an elf lord of immense power, rode forth, his presence driving the Witch-king to flee into the wilderness. Glorfindel's words, as the Witch-king vanished into the distance, became prophecy. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. These words, remembered and repeated, foretold the Witch-king's ultimate fate, leaving a glimmer of hope for the future. Even as the north lay in ruin, the victory at Fornost was bittersweet. Angmar's power was broken, and the Witch-king was driven out of the north, but the lands of Arnor remained devastated. Gondor's intervention was too late to save the kingdom of Arthedain, but it ensured that the Witch-king's reign of terror in the north had come to an end. With the fall of Arthedain and the dissolution of Arnor, the Dúnedain of the north faced a grim future. Their kingdoms had crumbled, their people were scattered, and their enemies still lingered. Yet, even in the face of such devastation, the line of Elendil endured. Arvedui's son, Aranarth, took up the mantle of leadership, not as a king, but as the first chieftain of the Dúnedain. The Dúnedain adapted to their new reality, becoming a wandering people who lived in secrecy and shadow. They abandoned their cities and strongholds, choosing to dwell in the wilderness where they could avoid the watchful eyes of Angmar's remnants. These Rangers of the North, as they came to be known, dedicated themselves to the protection of Eriador, guarding its borders and watching over its scattered inhabitants. Despite their diminished numbers, the Rangers maintained their traditions and heritage. They preserved the knowledge and artifacts of their forebears, including the shards of Narsil, the ring of Barahir, and the scepter of Anuminus. These heirlooms were kept safe in Rivendell, where Elrond became a guardian of the Dúnedain legacy. The heirs of Isildur were raised there, educated in the history and responsibility of their line. The Dúnedain's vigilance extended beyond mere survival. They played a critical role in maintaining the fragile peace of the North, ensuring that the lands remained free of Angmar's shadow. Their deeds went unsung, and their names were seldom remembered by those they protected. But their quiet heroism ensured that the spirit of Arnor lived on. This period of obscurity lasted for nearly 1,000 years, until the final heir of the Dúnedain, Aragorn, rose to fulfill the prophecy of his line. The legacy of the Dúnedain, though battered and hidden, had endured through centuries of hardship, culminating in the restoration of the throne of Gondor and Arnor in the person of King Elisar. While the lands of Arnor were ravaged by war and shadow, the Shire emerged as a sanctuary of peace and simplicity. Founded in 1601 of the Third Age by the Hobbits, this green and fertile region between the Barrow-downs River and the far downs became a refuge for those who sought a quiet life. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil surrounding it, a testament to the Hobbits' resilience and their love for the simple joys of life. The Shire was granted to the Hobbits by King Argaleb II of Arthedain, who admired their determination during their long wandering. With his blessing, Marcho and Blanco, the Falahide brothers who led the migration, guided their people into this new land. There the hobbits thrived, cultivating the soil, building homes in the rolling hills, and creating a society rooted in peace and cooperation. Though the hobbits were far removed from the great battles and ancient conflicts of Middle-earth, their new homeland was not entirely free of danger. The shadow of Angmar's war and the Witch-king's influence still loomed on the edges of the Shire's borders. Yet the hobbits managed to keep these threats at bay, often aided by the vigilance of the Rangers of the North, who protected them from the unseen dangers that lurked in Eriador. Despite these occasional brushes with the greater conflicts of the world, the hobbits of the Shire remained largely unaware of the pivotal role their kind would one day play in the history of Middle-earth. Their peaceful existence, preserved amidst the chaos, allowed them to develop a culture and way of life that would later become an anchor for the free peoples during the War of the Ring. The Shire was more than just a safe haven. It was a symbol of what the free peoples were fighting to protect. Its untouched hills and quiet streams stood as a reminder of the beauty and simplicity that could endure even in the darkest times. This small corner of Middle-earth, seemingly insignificant, would one day shape the fate of the entire world through the courage of its most unlikely heroes. For nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Arthedain, the line of Isildur lived in obscurity. The Dúnedain of the north, reduced to wandering rangers, safeguarded the remnants of their heritage while waiting for the day when their line would rise again. That moment came with Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the 16th chieftain of the Dúnedain, who was destined to reclaim the throne of Arnor and Gondor. Aragorn's path to kingship was far from simple. Raised in Rivendell under the guidance of Elrond, he was taught the history of his ancestors and the weight of his lineage. It wasn't until he came of age that Elrond revealed his true identity as the heir of Isildur. Armed with this knowledge, Aragorn took up the mantle of leadership, knowing that his destiny was intertwined with the fate of Middle-earth. The War of the Ring became the crucible in which Aragorn's claim to kingship was forged. As a member of the Fellowship of the Ring, he proved himself not only as a warrior, but as a leader and a unifier. His role in the defense of Rohan, the Paths of the Dead, and the final battle at the Black Gate demonstrated his ability to inspire loyalty and courage among men, even in the face of overwhelming odds. When Sauron was finally defeated and the One Ring destroyed, Aragorn's long journey culminated in his coronation as King Elessar. With this, the realms of Gondor and Arnor were reunited under one crown, fulfilling the prophecy that the line of Elendil would endure. Aragorn's reign marked the beginning of a new era, the Fourth Age, where the free peoples could rebuild and thrive after centuries of conflict. Under Aragorn's leadership, the ruins of Arnor were restored, with Fornost and Annúminas rebuilt as centers of culture and governance. The Shire, too, flourished, protected by the king's decree that no one would trespass upon its borders. Aragorn's marriage to Arwen Undomio, daughter of Elrond, symbolized the union of the lines of elves and men, bringing the story of Middle-earth full circle. The aftermath of the Angmar War left deep scars across the north. The lands of Arnor, once a proud Númenorian kingdom, lay in ruins, its cities abandoned and its people scattered. The devastation was so extensive that even with the Witch-king driven out, the region remained desolate for centuries. Yet, Amidst this desolation, the legacy of Arnor endured, carried forward by the Dúnedain. Aranarth, the son of Arvedui, chose not to take the title of king, knowing that Arnor's restoration would require more than a crown. Instead, he became the first chieftain of the Dúnedain, dedicating his life to preserving what remained of his people's culture and heritage. Under his leadership, the Rangers of the North emerged as silent guardians, protecting the lands and their scattered inhabitants from the lingering threats of orcs, wargs, and trolls. The Dúnedain were not the only ones to bear the weight of the war's legacy. The Barrow-downs, cursed by the Witch-king, remained a haunted and desolate place, a stark reminder of Angmar's malice. The hobbits, though shielded by the Shire's relative isolation, carried a faint memory of the Rangers' protection, unaware of the sacrifices made to keep their land safe. In Rivendell, Elrond safeguarded the heirlooms of Arnor, including the shards of Narsil and the ring of Barahir. These relics were a tangible connection to the past, symbols of hope that one day the line of Isildur would rise again. The wisdom and foresight of the elves played a crucial role in ensuring that the legacy of the Dúnedain was not forgotten, even as the world around them changed. The story of the Angmar War and its aftermath is one of endurance. It is a tale of a people who, despite overwhelming odds, refused to let their heritage be extinguished. The memory of Arnor, though faded, persisted in the hearts of the Dúnedain, waiting for the day when the North would once again rise from the ashes. The Angmar War and its aftermath shaped not only the North, but the destiny of Middle-earth itself. The fall of Arnor, the perseverance of the Dúnedain, and the eventual rise of Aragorn as King Elessar, all stemmed from this dark and pivotal chapter. It is a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring hope that defines Tolkien's legendarium. The scars left by Angmar's shadow were deep, but they were not permanent. The free peoples of Middle-earth, from the noble rangers of the North to the humble hobbits of the Shire, carried on. Their quiet acts of courage and determination ensured that the legacy of the North would not fade entirely, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. As the Fourth Age dawned with Aragorn's coronation, the vision of a reunited Arnor and Gondor became a reality. The once abandoned lands of the North began to flourish again, and the memory of the Dúnedain's sacrifices lived on in the hearts of their descendants. The banners of the king flew once more over Fornost and Annúminas, signaling the restoration of what had been lost. This tale of the North reminds us that history is not only shaped by great battles and powerful rulers, but also by those who endure in the shadows, protecting what they hold dear. From the wisdom of Elrond to the quiet strength of the hobbits, every thread in the tapestry of Middle-earth played a part in overcoming the darkness. And so, the story of Angmar's rise and fall ends. But its lessons remain. It is a reminder of the resilience of the free peoples, the power of unity, and the enduring hope that even the darkest times cannot extinguish. Thank you for joining me in exploring this epic chapter of Middle-earth's history. If you enjoyed this journey through the rise and fall of Angmar, please like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive. What part of the tale resonated most with you? Let me know in the comments below, and let's continue unraveling the legends of Tolkien's world together.